Hi guys, I'm Amanda from ROCKPILE Offgrid Homestead, and today I'm going to take you along as I make a Aussie Christmas classic, the Pavlova, otherwise known as a Pav, except I am going to be cooking mine in a barbecue. I'm going to try to use what we have on the homestead to create as much of this Pav as I can. Now I'm doing this Pavlova as part of an Aussie Homesteaders Pav challenge that was instigated by Bush Edge Homesteading. There's a few of us Aussie homesteaders that are partaking in the Pav challenge, and I'm going to link them all in the description. So if this is a kind of dessert that you're interested in and you want to see the different takes on it, the different ways to cook it across Australia, check out those other videos, or take up the challenge yourself and show us how you cook your Aussie Pav. So thanks for joining me guys, and I hope you enjoy cooking with me in my off-grid kitchen. So first things first, we need to gather our ingredients from the homestead. I've already got my eggs from the chickens, and I'm going to check out this passion fruit vine. I don't think it's ripe enough, but I'm just going to check them all anyway. All the ones I can see seem pretty green and hard. So I originally wanted to do something with our peaches, with some passion fruit, but the peaches weren't ripe either. I tried our plums, they were also super hard. It's just been a really cool summer, so they haven't ripened at this stage, even though they would usually be almost there. I remembered I had some mulberries in the freezer, so I thought, okay, that's a fruit from the homestead, I can use that. And I started to get an idea for kind of a purpley, yellowy, contrasty type topping decoration. I knew I had some more little purple and white flowers in my herb garden. I had some dried calendula petals, which are kind of yellowish, orangish, and I know I also had some nasturtiums tucked away, which were also in that yellow, orangey color range. So even though it wasn't part of my original plan, I was pretty happy with these colourful components I was pulling together. I did have a momentary thought, like I've got some mint there, maybe I could do mint and strawberries, but I don't have any strawberries growing. So in the spirit of trying to use as much as I can of what was ready to go, we ended up with some mulberries, some nasturtium, some native violet, some calendula petals, some dried calendula petals, and some bought passion fruit pulp. One of the tricks for a good meringue is to keep everything as grease-free as possible. So I'm just using some white vinegar with a paper towel to wipe down my bowl, and also my whisk attachment for my mixer. I have 4 room temperature eggs on hand. I'm going to separate the whites and the yolks. I'll put the yolks away and I'll be able to use them for something else another time. You want to be really careful here that you don't get any yolk in the white. Now, I'm only going to start with the whites of 3 eggs. And the reason for that is because the proportions of the sugar versus the white, you want like double the sugar of the weight of the whites. And I'm looking for a weight of around 125 grams. That will give me, that would mean I'll need like 250 grams of sugar. So I start with 3 egg whites, I'll weigh it, and if I need a little bit more to get up to around that 125 gram mark, I will put in the white of the 4th egg. And you can see that I did end up needing the white of that 4th egg. For a meringue, and generally for baking, if I need to use sugar, I'll use a caster sugar. I don't know if there's an equivalent kind of overseas or where you are, but it is a finer type of sugar, finer than your average granular sugar. And here I'm just weighing out double the weight of what I had with my whites. Now we can start mixing. I get in the whites and I get them mixing on kind of a medium to high speed. I also pop in maybe like a quarter of a teaspoon of cream of tartar, which I do that because it helps like stabilize the meringue, because you have to beat it so long. You don't want it to get over beaten and start separating. So I found that it just really helps stabilize it. Once we are at the soft peak stage, I start adding my sugar. Now we want to add that slowly, so I'm just adding it tablespoon at a time. You don't have to wait too long before each tablespoon, but just don't dump it all in at once. Partway through the mix, I'm going to scrape down any excess from the sides, and I also want to check to see the texture of the meringue. I'm looking for the feel of granules of sugar still in the meringue, and because we want them to be fully incorporated. If you leave granules of sugar in your meringue when you bake it, they will kind of weep out, and that's when you get those watery meringues. I'm also at this stage adding just a pinch of salt and a splash of vanilla. Then I just want to mix until we get that thick glossy look. It forms like a stiff peak, and check it occasionally and just make sure there is none of that granular sugar granular feeling, and then you'll be ready for the next step, which is forming up your meringue for baking. Now the classic Pav shape is a circle, and you can do this by eye, or you can trace out a circle like I'm doing by hand, or use a template, or whatever you feel is best. And then into this circle you dollop up a big pile of meringue goodness, and you shape it out however you like your pavlova to be. Some people like it quite flat on top with upright sides. Some people like to create a little divot in the top, in the center, so they can pile more fruit and cream in the center. I like my center a bit higher, and that's because I do something a little bit different with the decorating part, which you'll see. But this is kind of all you. And just keep in mind that as it cooks, it will spread slightly. Once I have my meringue all ready to go, I'm going to pop this into a 150 degrees Celsius oven, which is really on the cooler side, for about 25 to 30 minutes. And then I turn the oven off, and it sits there for another hour and a half, cooling as the oven cools. And for me, that oven is a barbecue with a hood. How we use it as an oven is we turn on the two outer burners, put the item in the center, and it works really well. Sometimes the temperature can be quite variable, so we might have to come up with a few innovative solutions for when the wind and outside temperatures are playing havoc with our temperature. And while that was cooking and cooling, I prepared all the other ingredients. I made a syrup out of the mulberries our mulberries that I got out of the freezer, just by heating it over the stove, a little bit of water, a little bit of sugar, and it broke down the juices, but I left some of those chunks of mulberries whole. I got some thickened cream, about 300 ml. I probably could have done more cream, though. Corey and I don't like our pavlovas too thick with cream, so I went with about 300 ml, and just whipped it up in with the mixer, added a little bit of vanilla, and put that in a container, put it aside, and that was ready to go. And then it was just a waiting game. It's been an hour and a half since I turned off the oven, and the meringue is looking good and ready to decorate. I already know that using mulberries, things are going to be a bit of a mess. Plus, I made a syrup out of them, so I'm just trying to manage that by putting baking paper around on my serving dish, and I'll decorate the pavlova on the dish instead of trying to like decorate it and then move it over. It's the meringue crust is, you can see it's like quite delicate. So I'm using my pizza flipper to get it over there. It does come off relatively easy off the baking paper. And here is where I deviate from tradition and start doing something slightly different with the crust. So I'm cracking that top layer, and I'm going to piece that out, put the cream inside, and then kind of jigsaw puzzle that crust back on the top. And here we are with all our components ready to make it look beautiful. Our own mulberries, passion fruit, sadly from a can because our passion fruit wasn't ready, nasturtiums and native violets that we picked early today, and then the calendula petals that I have been picking, that I've been harvesting for a little bit and drying out. I decided to start with the mulberry, mainly because that is like the chunkiest component. It's also the darkest component, so if I was just to lay it over the other elements, you wouldn't see them. I'm starting with the larger pieces of fruit that are still in the syrup, and then I start to drizzle the syrup over, just seeing how it's running and how it's gonna look. I'm kind of winging it here because I have all my components and I have this vision of this like purple, white and yellow floral topping, but I'm not 100% sure yet how exactly it's all going to come together. Next component to go on is the passion fruit pulp. Now this was a lot more liquidy than I was anticipating. I would have liked it to be thicker, and I think overall it made the like the mulberry syrup run, and you can see I'm kind of like looking for those like thicker bits in the center there, but it really was much more liquidy than I anticipated, so I didn't end up putting quite as much on. Next, I was considering whether or not I wanted to use a Maltesers. I elected not to. I wanted just to keep that real natural feel, and I felt it needed really brightening up. So I've got these calendula petals, and I'm just going to sprinkle them all over the top, and you can see that it's starting to really pop. The contrast looks incredible, and really loving how it's coming together so far. Then I'm getting another one of the bigger elements, the nasturtium flowers, and I'm going to cluster them in the center, and then around that I will put those delicate native violet flowers just placed around the top before doing a final little sprinkle of the calendula petals again. Time for a quick cleanup, which was actually not all that quick, considering how syrupy the mulberry plus the passion fruit pulp was. So that was a little bit of an effort, but not too many dramas. And here we have our finished pav. So let's take a closer look. Guys, I quite love it. Tell me what you think. I think it's so festive and floral and just beautiful. And I'll tell you what, it tasted so good.